I'm Virginia Beal. I'm a Senior Marketing Scientist from the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, which is based at the University of South Australia. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to be here to present some research that I've done with my colleagues, Magda Nanich-Teal and Jenny Romaniak, who you probably saw present in the session earlier. What we're focusing on in this research is looking at a very sort of classic use of a growth strategy, which is to extend a brand, either being used in luxury but also very widely used in consumer goods as well. It's an area in luxury that's been studied not that much. It's a very small body of literature, and given its prominence and importance, we felt it was one that we could do some extra research and hopefully have some useful findings to present to you today. So in terms of extending the brand, we can do that in one of two different ways. Essentially, the horizontal brand extension, where we move into adjacent categories, so moving the brand from handbags into shoes, which is pretty classic, or moving through the vertical extension into different price points. Just by way of example, looking at Gucci here, which has extended into a broad array of different categories and even opening a restaurant this year, the Gucci Osteria in Florence. So some categories we can see are quite similar in terms of perhaps in the leather goods category, but then also moving further afield to things such as a restaurant. So what we're interested in with this research is discovering some, particularly empirical findings around how far we can extend the brand. So the strategy around extending a brand is very classic in the sense of transferring the equity of the parent brand onto the extended category brand. So rather than launching a new brand, we're wanting to make use of the memories and thoughts that are already in the mind of the consumer and reduce that risk or uncertainty around purchasing perhaps a product that you might launch as a new brand in a different category. So having it under that umbrella, something that's widely done in the luxury category. We're hoping that this extension of the brand equity will manifest in a behavioural response. So we want someone to actually go out and buy it, have that impact on sales at the end of the day as a marketer. In the consumer goods category, there has been quite extensive research on horizontal brand extensions using both behavioural methods and attitudinal methods. So there's a very consistent finding out of consumer goods studies that categories that a brand extends to that are more similar or have a greater fit with the parent brand are more successful. So that's something that is well proven in the consumer goods category and even in this behavioural-based data as well. A secondary finding from packaged goods research is that the physicality or the location within store is a secondary factor in terms of creating a heightened behavioural response to a brand extension. Focusing though on the luxury category, it has been found that luxury brands are more extendable than consumer goods brands in the sense that it's really their hedonic potential that we can bring to a wider variety of consumption and experiential services. But essentially, that is mainly to do with when we're looking at consumer packaged goods brands, when we're evaluating an extension, it's mainly about the utility or the function of the product, whereas that isn't the case when we're evaluating the extendability of the luxury brand. We do know that the small body of research that's been done in luxury also finds a similar success factor in extension around the fit between the parent brand and the extension category. So research that's been done in luxury, particularly the study by Reddy that looked at the financial performance of luxury brand extensions, found that if a brand extends into a category that is consistent with the values embodied by the parent brand and also extends into create a cohesive portfolio of products, have found to be more profitable. And if a brand extends into a category that is too far from those values embodied by the parent brand or creates a non-cohesive portfolio of products, that profitability tends to decline. So in Luxury, we've only had studies looking at financial performance. We've also seen studies looking at attitude to the extension. So if I have an attitude to the parent brand, does that transfer across to the extension category? And we do see that, particularly when there's a high degree of fit or adjacency. Another method that's been used in the luxury sector is to interview brand managers and speak to them around their thoughts and feelings of the potential success of an extension. And again, fit of the category comes out as the main finding in terms of when people think the category or anticipate that the category extension will be successful. Probably the main thing to note here that was of interest to us is that there aren't any studies in the luxury category that actually look at behavioural transfer. So we haven't looked at if someone buys a brand in a particular category, are they more likely to buy it in the category that the brand is extended into. Of course, there's always this tension that's talked about in luxury academic studies around, are we extending the brand too far and reducing the desirability of the brand? We don't research that so much in this, as we are really focusing on this behavioural spillover effect. So in the studies that have been done in the past, this idea that the equity is going to spill over is really the term that's being used. And when we're talking about behaviour, we call it that behavioural spillover effect. So in terms of taking the past research that's been done and looking at what's really missing is this idea of, can we actually empirically observe behavioural spillover effects in terms of looking at purchasing of category or brand extensions? And we're wanting to also test empirically whether that category adjacency has an impact on that likely behavioural spillover effect. So for example, if we're looking at someone buying in the makeup category, a very closely adjacent category would be skincare, as opposed to if we're looking at someone buying makeup and then perhaps looking at their buying of household luxury items like soft furnishings and the like. So in terms of looking at this a little bit further, we know that the perception of luxury value is found to be quite different across different luxury markets or within different countries, and particularly Eastern versus Western evaluations of luxury values have been quite different. So we are quite interested in looking at, do these behavioural spillover effects vary by country? And even the perception of fit between the categories has been found to vary based on Eastern and Western mindsets. We're also very interested in looking at consumers of different ages. So we've heard quite a lot about millennials already this morning and how they have grown up in a very different media environment. So really also looking at, are young people different in terms of observing the presence of these behavioural effects? So in terms of how we conducted this study, we drew on the affluential panel, which comprises the top 25% of earners within a particular market. We looked at four different countries. So we're looking at the US, China, Singapore and Hong Kong, and overall we've spoken to over 1,200 different luxury consumers. So I should note that this data is collected as part of an omnibus study as opposed to a study that we designed ourselves. So we're a little bit constrained in terms of the categories that we're looking at. So they're the categories that are present within this particular data. And what we're wanting to know and ask about that is present in this data is people's ownership or purchasing of particular brands across different categories. We had the opportunity to explore the purchasing of 4 different brands across 5 different categories within this data. So we're able to look at fashion and fashion accessories as a category, watches, jewellery, skincare and makeup. Just to look at the sample profile here, so we've got a pretty even split, a little bit of a skew towards females. We're speaking to 18 to 59-year-olds, and we can see the slight variation there that we have across country. Okay, in terms of the method of analysis, if anyone was in the session prior in the other room, we had Jenny spoke quite a lot about the odds ratio. We're using that method again here in this research. So what we're really looking at there is a measure of association or relationship between two binary pairs. And when I'm talking about binary pairs, I'm talking about the example here. If I own Armani skincare, what is the likelihood that I'm going to own Armani makeup? Or if I don't own Armani makeup, what's the likelihood that I will own Armani skincare? What is the likelihood that I'll own Armani makeup? And then we look at the ratio of those two different scenarios, and we have essentially a very simple statistic that we can interpret. If we see the statistic is a 1, there's no relationship between those two variables. They're not related to each other. If we see a score of less than 1, there's a negative relationship. So owning the skincare makes you less likely to own the Armani makeup. If we see a score greater than 1, so we might see a score like a 10, that would make us 10 times more likely to own the Armani makeup if we owned the skincare. We also used some chi-square testing to test for differences between pairs. So we looked at pairing across the 5 different categories for the 4 different brands. So there was a lot of opportunity to look whether there was variation between them. We also did some initial tests around gender and brand because we were interested in mainly looking at variation by country and age. We wanted to see actually where there was going to be any confounding effects or overarching effects based on the brand or the gender, because we are looking at some categories that are skewed to particular genders. We didn't see anything statistically significant there, so we were able to move forward with confidence and look at the results based upon the other variables. I should note before I move forward that the categories that we had, so I talked a little bit earlier about fit or adjacency of categories and embodiment of the parent brand values or the cohesiveness of the portfolio of brands. And what we've really done with this data is sort of use what we have had here in the sense that categories that are closer to each other. So makeup and skincare are closer to one another than, say, makeup and fashion. Another pair that we've got also is jewellery and watches. They're more closely aligned in terms of a fit than if we're talking about jewellery and skincare. So I'll show you the results as we go through, but hopefully that is quite straightforward. So in terms of having a look at the first result, so what we're looking at is the odds ratio, and then we're looking at the confidence intervals around them, so the lower and the upper. As I mentioned earlier, if we see a ratio that's greater than 1, we can interpret that as a positive outcome. So here, looking at the overall result for all categories and pairs across all of the brands, we see a odds ratio of 4.7. So this means that if a luxury consumer owns a brand in one particular category, they're 4 to 5 more times more likely to own that brand in another category. I've shown the brand results up here, although I said there aren't any statistically significant differences between them. I think it's interesting still to see the odds ratios that we have at the brand level. So in terms of answering our first research question, we can quite clearly observe behavioural spillover effects in terms of purchasing across different categories within the luxury brand. Looking at our second research question and the results here, as I said, we had 2 categories that are more adjacent to one another, skincare and makeup and watches and jewellery, and we do see a much higher behavioural spillover effect for these more adjacent categories. In skincare and makeup, you're 23 times more likely to own a brand of, say, I used the example of Armani before, so own the Armani makeup if you own the Armani skincare. In terms of looking at the variation by market, we're very interested in looking at it country by country. We have the 4 different countries to observe. And what we actually found was the spillover effects are lower for China compared to the other the other Asian markets as well as the US. There's no difference between the other 3 countries, just between China and the 3 out of the 4 other countries.
So, sorry, that relates to the acceptance of the Chinese market of a brand spilling over different categories?
No,
so Chinese are less likely to accept spillover?
No, it's saying that in China we are less likely. In China, the chance that if you own the skincare that you'll own the makeup is less than in the US, almost half actually. So 6 times more likely in the US to own the brand in the other category. In China, it's 3 times more likely. I'll talk about the implications as I move on a little bit. In terms of looking at effects by age, simply we find that younger consumers, the 18 to 29-year-olds, have lower behavioural spillover effects, so they're less likely to own the brand in the other category across all of the pairs that we looked at. So in terms of conclusions, it is very strong empirical support measured using behavioural data showing that horizontal brand extensions are indeed valuable and important for a brand, and they're essentially working. So across all of the pairs that we looked at, there was a positive result. So I will say it's a effective portfolio management strategy in the sense that we do have a transfer of brand ownership across the different categories. So that equity transfer is resulting in a behavioural response that we can see within this data. It also suggests that brand level advertising should produce halo effects across the whole brand portfolio, because seeing that consumers are seeing or consuming the brand as an umbrella as such. Spillover effects were more strongly significant for adjacent categories, so extending some of that other research that's been done using different methods in the luxury category. And we can also see that in the case of makeup and skincare, we saw a much stronger behavioural spillover effect or likelihood of ownership between those 2 categories, which might support the secondary finding that was found in consumer goods about proximity in store. So when we sell those different product classes, they're quite typically close to one another in the physical location. We also found that Chinese luxury consumers exhibited weaker spillover effects. So, further supporting that idea that in Asia we do have diversity in terms of the response that we are seeing to brands, and in this case it really implies that products or product categories are being seen as more discrete, as opposed to that the brand is just being purchased across categories. So perhaps the product type and its functionality is the more important driver than just the brand across purchasing of categories. Looking at younger buyers also exhibiting significantly weaker behavioural spillover effects. So again, similarly to what I just said for Chinese consumers, they're seeing different categories as discrete rather than part of the halo. So as I mentioned earlier, advertising can, work at that halo level. With younger people, we're not going to see as stronger effect of that. So thinking about perhaps speaking to them about the particular product class, if that is what we're interested in getting them to go out and purchase. We do speculate that this lower behavioural spillover effect is occurring among younger people because they have different search and product evaluation behaviours than older people, so they do spend more time evaluating as well as more time with, say, online reviews or actively reading blogs or contributing and sharing information in a different way than we have seen older consumers traditionally doing. The other aspect that could be driving this would be younger consumers' shorter length of tenure as a luxury consumer. So if someone hasn't had the opportunity in terms of time or perhaps resources to buy across, say, the jewellery and the watch category, we're going to observe a lower spillover effect between the brands with that brand across the particular categories. So in terms of limitations of this study and also avenues for extending this into the future, we were limited to the particular categories that we had to look at and the countries, but extending this perhaps to more disparate categories. So, you know, we had Gucci launching the restaurant. Do we still see these behavioural spillover effects the further we get from adjacency? The results here suggest that we will see a decline as we move further from that core of the parent brand. We're also limited to people's self-reported ownership of a brand within a particular category, and as more sort of sophisticated data is available where recorded purchasing is available is another extension of this, so looking at that in a more robust way. We're also looking at actual data in the market today, which can suffer from this sort of survivor bias. So we're looking at extensions that have remained in the marketplace and the sharing or the purchasing across those. So, you know, if we're thinking about, I don't know what the stats are in the luxury sector, but in consumer goods, around 80% of extensions are withdrawn or fail in the market. So, you know, I don't know what it is for luxury, but just as a piece of information about how well these extensions must have done to exist and stay within the market is comes to mind. We also think it would be really great in the future to explore, you know, the lower spillover effects in China and with younger people. You know, we've speculated about why they might be happening, but actually finding out. And also looking at the effect that advertising can have either on heightening these spillover effects is something that we feel could be of great interest if we can look at, you know, single source data capturing someone's exposure to advertising and their purchasing over time. So thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed the talk on particularly the reported results are based on responses that you got from the questionnaire.
Yes.
And so what it is actually is a reflection of joint occurrence. So I remember having an Armani.
Currently owned.
So, I mean, ideally it would be great to see over a period of time, we have actually purchase histories of brands which essentially were brought across categories. So then you have the transition matrices, which essentially provide you a lot more information. And
you know anyone who has the data, we'd be able to look at it.
Because this is at a point in time about ownership as opposed to I bought the bag and then I bought the shoes. So that is another type of analysis that could be done that would be really valuable.
And I think particularly the categories that you're looking at, I think at least it's possible to have larger amounts of data rather than let's say bags.
Not consumer-centric, longitudinal data. It's really hard to find.
Okay. Anyway, so I think but I think it's a good start, and then I think some of the questions that you're asking certainly are very, very important for I think practice as well. But to do that, I think maybe some of the practice brands that you have contacts with in Australia might actually give you that question, that to answer those questions.